y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I virtually invite people into the blog cabin to chat about life. And today's guest is no stranger to Chats from the Blog Cabin. She's been on 4 or 5 times, maybe even more. But today she is coming on to talk about her book, which came out in May. Mine looks a little worn because it actually went to California with me and I read it on the plane. Common Threads, Why the Answers to the Present's Lie in the Past by Melissa Harrell. So, Melissa, welcome back to the show and reintroduce yourself to people that don't know who you are.
Right. Well, thank you, Melissa, for having me virtually, but I also have had the privilege of being in the actual blog cabin. So I have that one to brag about as well, which is a really cool space that you've created. So for those of your fans who have not had the opportunity of the other multiple times we've had many conversations, my name is Melissa Harrell, and by trade, I am a mental health counselor, but I'm also an author. I have written a children's book, and also this book that just came out is my first book targeting more for that adult audience. So, but I'm excited to be here with you today and share whatever. I'm also a mom. I have 3 kids, 20, 18, and 17. So I don't know that they're always children, but they're young adults at this point. You and I are in that same phase of trying to launch successful young people into the world. Daunting, no less.
That is so true. And for those that don't know, Melissa and I go back way when my oldest was in kindergarten, and Maddie is now 27. So you can figure out how long that is.
Amazing that we still look the same though, Melissa.
Yeah, they just got older. We didn't. We just stayed the exact same way.
That's right. That's right.
So let's talk about Common Threads. Why did you write this book? What I know, because I've been along a little bit with the journey with you. Like, you were on fire to write it, and you wrote this book like very quickly. But why did you write this book?
So originally, the intention was not to publish a book. The writing that I was doing was really for my own healing from a personal trauma. But I had been blogging. I started blogging in 2018. And so it was really, once it really just kind of all wove together, not to work on the common threads there piece, but it just kind of all started flowing together. And then after a couple of friends read some excerpts, they were like, this could really help some people. You should think about publishing this book. So from there, I just kind of I really fell in love with the book, and just felt like it had some purpose in the world, and it just had to be done.
Now, there's a theme through the book, and you can see it with the quilt and the pattern. So tell us about the threads, what the threaded theme is throughout the book.
Yeah, so a lot of people ask me, like, was that the original title for the book? And like most writers, it was not the original title for the book. The original title for the book was called Refined by Fire, which became a chapter in the book. But one day I just started thinking about, we use a term in trauma therapy called trauma threads. And so you follow that thread through until it comes into the root cause of a root cognition of that particular trauma or event. And so it just started making sense, not just from a trauma perspective, but that in our lives, people come in and out of our lives almost like a loom weaving something together. And so between the thoughts of that, and also I grew up in Western North Carolina. Many of my grandmothers were quilters and beautiful seamstresses. And so it really just tied it full circle for me, from everything from childhood to trauma therapy into just friendships and relationships in life.
Now, you get very personal in this book about some of the things that happen in your life, and I'm not going to give it away, but you give a very personal, and of course, I know you in real life, so I know the whole backstory and everything. But what made you decide to go that deep? Because it had to bring up a lot of, because you've healed so much, and then it had to bring up a lot of those feelings back up to the surface.
Right. Well, I think in one sense, I have always been very transparent and vulnerable with people. For most people who know me like you or have known me for a long time, most of the stories in there were not unfamiliar. There were just more details to those particular stories. And I think one of the greatest compliments, and I hear this often from people who know me, is they say when they read the book, they're like, I hear you telling the story in my head. Which to me as a writer says you found your authentic voice. If you sound like who you are when you write, then that's your authentic voice. But as far as telling those stories, another piece to that is, mental illness has so much stigma, and many of the stories that I share are related to mental health and mental wellness. And I think that as a mental health counselor, if I'm not willing to say, hey, these are the things that happened in my family, and these are the ways that we navigated this, here are new tools to do it, how can I ask other people? And as I talk about in the book, one of the most important things that we can do as a society is to become more vulnerable in sharing these stories, because that is what will help us to work through these things and to move forward. We've hidden things for too long, whether those are abuse or whether they're related to mental health. And it's time for us to say, hey, you know what? Actually, that happened to me too. Or, you know what? This is very common. So let's all figure out how to heal, and then also how to prevent this from happening to other people.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you have 3 kids. Have your kids read the book?
Yes, actually. So my middle daughter, Spencer, was kind of my copy editor at times, if you will. She was very intrigued in the whole process. And so if I went away for a weekend to write, as soon as I would walk in the door, she would say, give me that book. And she would want to read what I had done. And so it kind of became this little joke between the two of us, give me that book. So she was very involved. And then they have since read it. Before I published anything that pertained directly to them, or had anything that was specific content related to them, they were able to read and say, I'm okay with that, or I'm not okay with that.
So what was their response after they read it, though?
They were very happy about the process. I mean, they're very proud of what I've done. And I think for them, it probably, because obviously they're a huge part of particularly the second half of that story, I think it just reiterated to them how proud I am of them. And because really watching my kids walk through this also inspired me to say, wow, when you bring these tools and you bring the right people to the table, it really is remarkable what people can overcome.
And I love how you give at the end of, I'm trying to find one of the resilience skills, the back to basics. I love how at the end of each chapter you give a resilience skill. So let's talk about that. What made you decide to do that?
The reason I embedded those in the book is because really those are the key. Resiliency is a word that's getting tossed around a whole lot right now, and that's fine. But I think that people really don't understand what it means and how you develop it. Resilience basically just means the ability to bounce back, the ability to come back from something that should be really devastating. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about that term. It also doesn't mean that you don't get to sit with the difficulty and say, you know what? This is really bad. It's not good. It's not Pollyanna, like, oh, this terrible thing happened, but I'm going to make a great life anyway. But it's this ability to push through, to work through, and you go through those things. So the skills that I've embedded in the book, everything from breathing techniques to some things from the mindfulness world, and grounding and sensing in and appreciating what's going on with your body. The whole point of all those goals is to reset the body off of fight or flight and back into what is the healthy state of rest and digest. So I just felt like if from one, as a trauma therapist, we call it being trauma informed. I knew that people who would read this book would identify and had their own traumas. So if you're going to introduce those things to people or share difficult things, you need to give them coping skills and tools along the way to help them as they're absorbing their own stuff or someone else's stuff along the way. So, yeah.
And I know you mentioned on previous podcast episodes, and I will make sure I link where all the episodes that you've been on, because you've been on like several. But you've mentioned growing up with a mom who had a mental health disorder. So let's talk about that and how that made you go into what you were doing now and writing this book, how big of a part that was in writing the book.
Yeah, well, it's greater than just my mom. Actually, both of my primary caregivers. As a young child, growing up in the early 1970s, most of us didn't go to preschool or childcare. A majority of us were cared for either by our parent or a grandparent. And so with my mom working, I stayed with my father's mother, who was a paranoid schizophrenic. And I share in the book about, I didn't know that there was anything wrong with her. I thought everybody's grandmother talked to dead people and just did these things. But then my mother had bipolar disorder. My mother, I like to share with people, it was really like having two moms growing up, because in the early years of my growing up, which I didn't know, my mom had postpartum depression after my sister, who's 5 years younger than I am. But other than that, my mom was a high functioning person. As far as what you would see from the outside, my mom actually went to nursing school with two children and was top of her class. She was a phenomenal intensive care nurse. So her signs of bipolar disorder really did not start as far as impacting us as a family until I was in late middle school, early high school. But once it started, it came pretty quickly. And in the early years, it was things like you just never knew what side of her you were going to get. I could walk in the door from school or work or whatever, and she could be in a great mood and you had a great conversation about, all kinds of things. Or you could walk in the door and you were like instantly in a moment of what is going on, and she was paranoid about things. And then as time went on, by the end of my high school years, she was pretty much unable to work and eventually went on to disability. And my mother was very young when she had me. So my mom at age 41 was widowed because my father had died and completely on disability. So I'm 49 now, and the thoughts of 8 years of my life at that point where I am now of not working or, just struggling with that is a lot to think about.
Yeah, especially people that know you, to know that if you don't work for 8 years, that would totally drive you crazy. I mean,
Right.
really, because you're a go, go, go. Like we were just talking before we came on, this book came out in May and we've been trying since May to get you on, and it's been like, or your schedule or my schedule didn't match.
Yeah. And with my mom, really, so my father died and he was 8 years older. And really, so there really was nobody there. Like I see myself with my kids now. My daughter is 20 and I still feel, we're important parts in their lives, like the emotional support, even some financial support to help launch our children out into the world. And so for my mom, I pretty much lost that connection and really became her caretaker along with my grandmother's caretaker. So, instead of in a season of life where there was support that should have kind of been ongoing both sides as you're walking through that bridge, the tables got turned very quickly. Now at this stage of life, I see many of my friends who are involved in caring for their parents, and that's a natural progression of life. But to be doing that in your 20s and then also when you're raising young children is quite overwhelming.
I can just imagine. Now we need to take a brief commercial break. When we come back, you do have your book with you, correct?
I do.
When we come back, we'll have you read an excerpt from your book.
Okay, sounds good.
Hi, my name is Joanna, and I would like to share with you a little bit about Shores of Grace, Shores Philly. It's a ministry located in Philadelphia. The portion of Shores that I volunteer for goes into Kensington, an area greatly impacted by homelessness and addiction. And we go and we take love, food, clothing, snacks, conversation. We believe that it is a way that we can meet people right where they are and show them the love of Jesus. We have seen lives changed in big ways and in small ways, and we have built wonderful relationships with the people in the community. We have big plans, more we'd like to do, and we would appreciate any support, either through prayer or through donation. If you would like to donate, you can go to shoresofgrace.com, and in the menu, click on Donate. And we just ask that you put Philly in your donation comments. Thank you.
And we are back sharing with Melissa Harrell. She says Melissa Harrell up there. Common Threads. She's the author of Common Thread, Why the Answers to the Present Lie in the Past. And before we went to the break, Melissa, you said you were going to read an excerpt from your book. So,
yeah, here we go. Okay. Ever since the death of my parents, whenever I feel overwhelmed, my heart longs to be near my roots. I guess the more complex life becomes, it's natural to long for the simplicity and familiarity of childhood. I sit down and cover myself with my quilt that is nearing 50 years old. The top is an array of patchwork, and the backing is a soft pink with butterflies. My mom used to lay me on this quilt for tummy time, and she said I would try to catch the butterflies. I run my fingers over the perfectly aligned squares that were tediously hand-stitched one by one and marvel at how the colors and designs differ. Yet they are all started with the same plain cotton that was transformed to serve its purpose in this cloth to be designed. How incredible that as different as some things are in other cultures, there are still so many similarities. I am now grounded not only in my own family, but feel connected to those women thousands of miles away. I feel safe and embraced. I recite in my head some positive belief statements. I can survive this. I am safe. I can get my needs met. I begin to bring up the image in my mind. I see the white stone walls and the towering steeple. From my yard as a child, I could see the steeple of my church. It towered high in the sky, and I imagined it was God looking over me. Now, in this shadow of the steeple lies the reminder of all those whom I held dearly. While not all the influential players in my life are buried there, many are. And like a giant hug, I feel covered and safe by the reminder of their contributions to my life. A movie reel begins to play out of the scenes of my early life. I use my 5 senses to tap in for full effect. The memory ribbon unravels, and scene after scene begins to flip in my mind like the Viewmaster I used as a child. I see bright red and orange fall foliage. I smell the scent of honeysuckle. I taste fresh baked strawberry pie. I hear the laughter of large family celebrations, and I remember the faces of forgotten friends and favorite dolls. The memories begin to flood over me, and as predicted in my training, I literally feel a physical relaxation in my body. All my senses are now activated, and I hold my focus on the image of my church. I can feel the hot summer nights of vacation Bible school, the cool water washing over me on the day of my baptism, the beautiful sounds of a choir singing on Easter Sunday, the feel of a terry cloth bathrobe I wore in Christmas plays, and heartfelt altar calls for forgiveness and the heart flutters of a first crush. I bask in the relief of release that flows through my body, which has been running in fight or flight for days now. I am mentally and physically drained and yearn for the switch to turn this all off. There is nothing left to give. In this quiet space, there is no expectation of me. I don't have to figure this all out. I find relief and temporary shelter from this fear and suffocating pain. I continue to breathe in deeply and soak up my memories. In the middle of these beautiful thoughts, there begins an intrusion. Other memories arise, ones that do not bring me peace. They hold deep sadness and pain. I sense the tensing of my once relaxed body and feel the tears begin to flow. My memories are no longer peaceful and safe. The trauma memory chain begins, and like a line of dominoes, they flow without warning. The smell of rubbing alcohol permeates, and I am in a hospital room sharing Cheetos with my dad while a bag of experimental chemo drips into his body. Next, I'm locking tearful eyes with him on my wedding day and giving thanks because he made it to give me away. A few weeks later, I'm hugging his cancer-ridden body for the last time on Thanksgiving Day. As this thread ends, I see myself placing one last kiss on his forehead before his casket is closed for the final time. The tears are overwhelming and the sobs are now audible as the scene quickly shifts. I'm having a conversation with my mom and longing for the one who raised me, not this mentally ill version that I no longer know. My body flinches as I remember the click of the doors locking behind me as I walk out of a behavioral health unit while she begs me not to leave her. I'm flooded with feelings of helplessness and guilt, and my hands tingle as I remember the simultaneous rush of pain and relief that came the night I found out she had died. I quickly open my eyes and reorient myself to the room. This is not good. I recognize that not only am I reeling from my current crisis, but all my past trauma threads are also unraveling. I know that I'm in very dangerous waters. I am not safe. It's time to return to therapy.
And I love that. I mean, you really, at the very beginning of the book, you really like have a cliffhanger, and then it's weaved throughout the book.
Yeah.
it must have taken so much strength to sit there and sit in those memories and sit in those feelings when you're writing, because I know how quickly you wrote this book. Like, you were on fire for it. You were like, boom, I'm going away this weekend. Boom, I'm writing.
Yeah.
And nothing got in your way. But, well, things often came up, but you still stuck to writing and you wanted to push it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you push through all that?
Yeah. So I don't know that I've ever, well, that's not true necessarily, but it really was like a burden, but a good burden. And it was like you said, I have to do this. Everything got put to the side. It had to be done. And when I would sit down, for the most part, it just really just came. I think part of it was because of the crisis that I was in. Even though some of the memories that I was tapping into were painful, there were also very soothing memories. So there was that simultaneous sensation of moving back into that. And part of what I did when I wrote the book, I actually went back to my hometown. I rented not a blog cabin, but a little cabin or little VRBO place, and literally just walked my childhood grounds and went to places that I had not been in years. And so there was a lot of healing that took place in those spaces. So although there were painful things, I think actually, and that's a beautiful part of trauma therapy, when you begin to heal, you replace those painful memories, they become less frequent and the more positive ones come forward. So I think it was really, it was difficult, but it was also, I felt I was healing. And so it was encouraging me to continue to do it even more and more and more.
Yeah. And I love the fact, anybody else with their dad, losing their dad at such a young age, and then losing your mom, basically the mom that you knew, not really losing her right then, but the mom you knew growing up. A lot of people would have taken that and taken a totally different turn, but you chose to take all those feelings in turn, try to help each other. And you mentioned earlier that your mom was a nurse. And at one point in time, you had planned on going back to nursing, go back to be a nurse, and then you got totally sidetracked on that. So let's talk about how you handle your disappointments and you handle those things that, God puts other plans in your place.
Oh, yeah. So I never, ever intended on being a mental health counselor. And I've tried to break up with this career more times than any bad boyfriend you could ever date. But for whatever reason, this is what I was put here to do. And so I talk about in the book, my journey. My original major was not mental health. My first major was actually pre-med. I wanted to be a pediatrician. That's all I'd ever wanted to be. And then because of my mom's issues, medical school seemed like way too financially and just stress related too much. So I said nursing. So I got accepted into a nursing program, and then the book, you'll have to read the book to find out how I wound up not going on that journey. But then recently I actually came back to nursing and was doing prerequisites to return to nursing school in 2019. And then something else happened that stopped that path. And so, I guess for whatever reason, that is just not the path I'm supposed to walk. But it's definitely been interesting.
But in a way, you are using some of those skills that you learn, especially nursing skills, when you go. I'm going to segue into where some of the proceeds from the book goes to when you go on the mission trips with Unearth Hope.
Yes. And so in 2017, I started traveling to Guatemala to do work with a group of folks who this is now emerged into a nonprofit group called Unearth Hope. And we run medical missions. And so that's how I kind of got the fire lit back in me for nursing, because I thought, okay, I want more clinical skills, more hands-on skills that I can use with this particular thing. But I did go back and train as an EMT. And so I do use those skills, basic skills, blood pressure taking and vitals and all that stuff when we're there. So none of it, I tell people all the time, no matter what you wind up doing in life, nothing is ever wasted. As a matter of fact, I love it when people say to me, oh my gosh, you have an undergraduate in dance. What do you do with that? Well, first of all, I did actually teach for 5 years. I taught dance, so I'd like to think that I did something in that major. But what people don't realize, the creativity and the problem solving and the ability to think outside the box, that's what arts do for us. And it's not always about the art. It's not always about whether it's writing or painting or dancing or music or singing. And that's where I get really passionate about not taking arts out of education, because there's so many powerful things that arts does for us and teaches us that other subjects just can't do. So you just, nothing's wasted. Everything, you utilize it somehow. I use my dance and my creativity a lot in therapy, particularly when you're working with children. You can't just sit and talk and get what you need to come out. You have to find ways. You have to speak their language, and play and creativity are definitely ways. We also lose that as adults. I think I bring a lot of that into my adult therapy, because we just kind of, I hate this term, but it's true. We just kind of get it beat out of us in society. Like, we're just supposed to be these robots going around, math, reading, science, whatever. And that's great. But, the biggest discoveries and the biggest things in technology, they've come because of people's creativity and risk taking, not necessarily what they learned out of a book.
Now, you would think with all this has happened that you would want to stay safe and not take the risk. But to me, it seems like every time I turn around, you're trying something new. So how is that involved? Like, you wrote a book. This is not your first book. This is your second book.
Right.
You read a children's book. You at the spur of a moment, I know this because I know personally, within 72 hours, you were packed and ready to go on a mission trip to Guatemala. Now, anybody else, that would have sent them hurriedly in the corner, it little balled up in a ball. But you took it all in stride.
Well, I think there's two sides to this coin. One, there is the side that everybody sees that looks like I take all that stuff in stride. And there is the other side of the coin, which is I love adventure. I love to be challenged. I get bored very easily. And so if I'm doing the same thing monotonously over and over, it does not do good things for me. So I do like to be challenged. But I also like that's one of the reasons I've continued to blog, post the book, because I think that people, they see, oh, you wrote a book. And even though there were all these challenges in there, everything's great. Well, in the past 3 months, I've had some of the worst experiences I've had since even before what happened in the book. I could write a whole nother book. So I think reminding ourselves, which is what I tell my clients all the time, don't literally judge people or books by their cover. There's still a lot of stress and struggle that goes. So yes, I did pack for a trip in 72 hours. It was exciting, but there was also a lot of, am I doing the right thing? Should I be doing this? There's still a lot of yin and yang that goes on in my head that probably doesn't get transferred out into the universe as it would for other people, maybe.
See, that's the thing right there, is that a lot of people are so scared to show the vulnerable side. Just so scared to show, like you just said, there was a lot of stuff going on in your head at the time. Should I or shouldn't I? A lot of people are scared to show that. How can we get over that, being afraid?
I think the first thing you have to remind yourself is that every single person has something that they don't like about themselves, or that they feel that they're inferior to. And that's a whole part of therapy. We spend most of our time trying to figure out what is your core belief. And so for me, as I reveal in the book and share, mine is I'm responsible for everything and everyone and all the things. And so when you find what that negative cognition is, then you begin to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm not this. I am, for me, it's now I can choose to be responsible for what I am responsible for. And so same thing with whether it's feelings of self-esteem, how can you do this? It's true. Like, what is the worst thing that could happen? I mean, I could have spent all that time writing, but I grew so much through that writing, and my life was transformed by that writing. It really didn't matter whether it was published or not. So if we don't take the risk, we don't know. in 2012, I took my first international trip and went to Kenya. I'd never left the United States besides the Bahama or that one accidental crossing at the Canadian border. I mean, so, it was scary, but it was exhilarating. And there were a couple of things that happened on that trip that were really could have been deadly or dangerous. But I've said to myself 100 times, man, I'm so glad I took that risk. I'm so glad I took that risk. And so I think the more you practice vulnerability and the more you try to be authentic and real and true to who you are and take off your mask. And there's no mask of, okay, well, this is Melissa Vera that I know on the blog. No, the Melissa Vera I know on the blog is the same Melissa Vera I know when we go have a coffee. And that's really what we want to do, because then we have real deep connections and real deep relationships, not only with other people, but with ourselves.
That is so true. And you mentioned Kenya. So let's just go and talk about the first book that you wrote, which is Elizabeth and Stella Meet Zoe.
Yeah. So in 2012, when I went on my first trip to Africa, I was in Kenya and I met a young girl named Stella. And most of the children in the program were learning to live without their parents because their parents have mostly died from HIV. The program that I work with is called Zoe Empowers. And it's just a beautiful model. And that was in 12, and we're 10 years post that. And they have just exploded this model all over Africa and into India with this project. But all the children touched me. But this one girl just really, I couldn't believe it. I mean, she was hosting us in her yard, giving us almost like a porridge to drink that she had made. I mean, she barely had enough to take care of her family, and she was being so hospitable to us. And in one part of that, she was coming around helping us wash our hands before we ate. And I just remembered thinking, wow, this must have been what it felt like for the disciples when Jesus washed their feet. And so when I came home, it just felt like, again, a burden, something that I had to do, that her story needed to be told, and that all these children's stories need to be told, because everyone needs to know what these kids are struggling and also how they transform. They were so inspiring to me. And I thought about her and many of these kids over the past 3 years when I would think about, I can't do this anymore. I just want to give up. This is too hard. I would think back and say, how did they do it? What did they do? What would they say to me? And, I think reminders that you can learn from young people, whether they're children or young adults, that just because we might be older, we don't always know better. But the book was a partnership between myself and Amy Fetzer, who is an artist in Raleigh, and she lovingly watercolored those pages. It took her almost 6 months to watercolor all those pages there. It is just some of the most beautiful art. And I think what's impressive about Amy's artistic ability is I took her pictures and things, and she would just sit with those images and really absorb them into her soul. She had experiences in Guatemala, but she had not been to Kenya or Africa. But when I look at her paintings, I feel the actual sensation of being in that space. So to be able to create that when you've not actually experienced it firsthand is just a gift beyond a gift. And so the proceeds from Elizabeth and Stella go back to Zoe Empowers to help them continue to push that model through.
And I just love the fact that every little thing that you do, you always find some way to give back. Like, portion of the proceeds for Common Threads go back to Unearthed Hope. This book goes to the other thing. Now, what instilled that in you?
That's a great question, because I can think back to being in 7th grade and being the one in Beta Club who was like, hey, we had a food drive. I still have the little clip from the newspaper because there was just canned food flowing all over the place at the school from all the generosity. But I would have to say that came from the community that I was raised in. It was just a very rural community where neighbors took care of neighbors. You were just we were brought up to help each other and to support each other. And so I definitely think it had to do with the community that I was raised in. And a huge part of that community was my church. So I think just everywhere I went, it was what you did. When my dad had cancer, they had a benefit dinner, and I mean, cakes were being auctioned off for like hundreds and hundreds of dollars for like some of these ladies' cakes. I mean, it's just how I think the community that I was raised in.
I had a question. Now I know. You mentioned earlier that you went back to Western North Carolina and wrote part of your book there. Now let's talk about how on the book tour, because you kind of launched your own little book tour, that you would go back to each place in the book that's meant so much to you, and kind of meet and greet people there, and either do book signings or read from the book or even sell the book. How much that meant to you?
Oh, that was that doing that brought the whole process full circle for me. So it was one thing to sit. I actually rented the exact same house that I rented the year I wrote. So it was kind of surreal to walk around in that space and remember, wow, I sat here and wrote these 4 chapters here. Or I remember last year going and having this conversation with, she's in the book, my cradle baby friend, as I call her, Misty. I remember Misty, us talking about this part of my life, and it reminded me of this other thing. And then to be able to celebrate with the people who I haven't seen, some of them I hadn't seen in 20 years, but it doesn't matter, because as the title reads, Common Threads, those people, what they've etched in your life and what they've meant to you matters. And getting a little emotional about this, but so my dad's first cousin, she lived across the street from us growing up. And she is one of those, what I like to call, she was, a gatekeeper. She knew a lot of the things in the family that others didn't. And so one of the first things I did when I was back home in July, when I was writing the book in 2020, what year is this? 2022? In 2021. Yeah. I went to her house and sat in her living room, and we just talked. And I asked her all the questions that I had wanted to ask about things about my father, because no one in the family, quote, knew who my dad's biological father was. She was able to give me some information that I would have never known. We talked about a lot of things. She shared a lot of things. So this summer, when I was back in July, what joy it was to walk in there into her living room and to hand her a copy of my book. And then she read the book and she called me. We had a wonderful conversation, and she just, because it meant a lot to me that my family felt like this book was done very respectfully, and that I brought honor to my family, and not like, oh my gosh, this is a tell-all book of whatever. No, there's a purpose to all of these stories. And she was so complimentary in how it was done and so loving. And sadly, she passed away in August. So I was there in July. We had that conversation the first part of August. And my heart hurts for her family. They're getting ready to have holidays without her. But I would have never had those experiences with her had I not written this book. And those are the memories and the treasures that I will have that are so special to me from that process. So to go back home and to reconnect with people that I'd not seen in years, and to be able to celebrate, one of the places I did a book signing was in West Jefferson. And that is one of my childhood best friends, Aletha. That's her business. We were biology lab partners in high school. And so we've stayed connected over the years. But to go back with your high school classmate to celebrate her success and owning her business, and to click your success. I mean, just those moments were really sweet and special. And so definitely. And then last weekend, taking it down east, New Bern I write about in the book, because it's a place that I actually spent probably as much time writing there as I did anywhere else. And so to be able to take my books, they're available in the Next Chapter bookstore, which is a local author bookstore there in New Bern. And I used to, when I would go for the weekends to write, I would walk around downtown and I would walk by that store and I would say, my book's going to be in there. My book's going to be in there. And so to take it and to see it happen, is kind of really, really special.
Yeah, I know you and I had several conversations about New Bern and how much we love New Bern. New Bern is such a cool little town, and it's so peaceful there.
And there's a lot of art there. I a lot of artists. I actually was in conversation with another writer who he lives in Greenville, but he writes there in New Bern. And, you know, so you just, it's a great place to connect with other people who are, you know, working on their craft too.
So what made you decide to go back to each of these places and kind of have a book tour in each of these places to connect? What made you decide to do that?
Part of it, I think, was I wanted to relive the experience. I mean, if I could relive one thing in my life, it would be to walk every step of writing this book over. I mean, it was such an incredible experience that I just absolutely, it was to savor and to go back and try to kind of recapture those moments and those experiences. But it really was, yeah, there were moments of like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to make this go here. And why does this not work here? I mean, there's always those moments when you're a writer, but it was just, I mean, I could just get excited over the craziest thing. Like, oh my gosh, look how this will go here now, you know? So I think it was a lot of just wanting to relive that experience.
Do you ever think about writing a book that talks about going back to each one of these places and reliving the experience of writing the book, but now you have the actual book there?
Yeah, you know, what I was wanting to do and was my intention was to actually blog about the creation of the book and the spaces. And so maybe I will, but right now other things have taken the forefront of what seems to be the important thing of writing with this particular thing. So, yeah.
So what do you have coming up next? Any more books in the work?
I knew you were going to ask that question. So yes, I don't know if there are books, but there's a lot of writing that's been going on. I'm actually working on a fiction book, adult fiction. And this was a story that I actually started back in 2014. So anybody who writes will tell you, we've just got stacks of random stuff around, some of it on paper, some of it on hard drives that I have had to do crazy things to try to get the content off of. Thank God for Google Drives now. These kids have no idea what we've been doing to try to save this stuff over the years. But that book is a fiction book, which is set in my hometown. So I do enjoy the idea of writing things that are set in North Carolina because I personally love this state. I think this is a wonderful state, and I know I'm biased 100% because I've only lived in this state. However, I just think that we have a lot of really beautiful places. We have a lot of unique, cool things here in North Carolina. I love our mountains. I love our foothills. I love our rivers and oceans. And there's just so many beautiful places to experience. And so they make fantastic settings for stories. And also for me, I think that's one of the reasons I think this book was so easy to write, because if I can tap into something that I know, I can be creative with it. But I also like that foundation of thinking through in my head something that I know and bringing that to life. And there's been a lot of books in North Carolina. There are many authors, local authors who write about towns in North Carolina, but there are some in the West for sure. There's those, but they often tend to be set in our coastal towns or different places. And so I really wanted to bring some light and attention, or want to bring some light and attention to the area where I grew up, which they have cleverly done all of this wonderful walking trails and wineries and really cool things. But to kind of be able to show in the book the contrast of what it used to be and what it is now.
I love how you said that. A lot of people tend to focus on the coast, but yet they don't get in the books. They don't get the geographical details right. Because I know in some of the popular books, they're like living in, or they're on the Outer Banks, but they took the road to the road to Chapel Hill, the straight road, and we're like, there's
no, you didn't.
Chapel Hill.
Right. There's no road there. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm playing around with that, but I am also working also on a couple of nonfiction thoughts. One being I do a lot of clinical supervision for counselors, and I really enjoy that. I enjoy mentoring people in my field. And so I've thought about potentially like, something to support them as they launch into the field, and kind of like letters you would leave behind for people to learn from you, because I feel like in our culture, and especially in American society, we've lost the art of mentorship and apprenticeship. I think that we are leaning so heavily into advanced degrees and book knowledge. And there's nothing wrong with that. I have 2 advanced degrees. However, where you learn your skill and where you learn your craft is when you get into the field. And the types of mentors that you have in your field make or break you. And I know that's certainly been the case for me. So that's one thing I'm tossing around. And of course, I'm looking at a book for moms, specifically for moms, because a lot of the work has been dedicated to that.
Because you do a lot of workshops for moms too.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thinking about flipping some of those into books is exciting. Yeah. It's the time. It's time. It's always the enemy, right?
Yes. Because honestly, looking at knowing you and knowing that I don't think you ever sit still. Because even sometimes when we're on conference calls with the nonprofit Unearthed Hope, you're putting your groceries up, or you're doing this, or you're doing that, and I'm like, how does she not sit with me?
It is hard, but some of that is my personality. My father was very much this way. I mean, we're hyperactive. I don't have issues focusing. I can focus. It's not a problem. But I'm definitely hyperactive. Hence why dancing was a great outlet for me. But it is very hard for me to settle. That is something I've had to teach myself. That's why I'm very passionate about the mindfulness and meditation. Yoga has taught me a lot about how to stop and how to settle. But it really is hard. It really is hard.
Now, one last thing before we get into the nugget and where people can find you is you mentioned earlier that your father passed away at Thanksgiving and the holidays are coming up. Mm-hmm. So how do we navigate that trauma, the loss?
Yeah. It's so interesting because my father has now been dead for 25 years and my mother for 14. And so you would think that it gets easier. And it does to some degree on some things, but it's always forever changed and different. And so with that, you just you try your best, you keep what works, and you try new things. I mean, last year was one of my first Thanksgivings being divorced. And so my kids were going with their dad for Thanksgiving. And of course, my parents are deceased. So it was kind of like, I didn't want to do that. So I have another friend who was divorced, and we wound up doing yoga and going to a restaurant together. And that's something I never would have done. But honestly, it's a wonderful memory. It's a great memory. So it really comes with honoring the past, remembering what works and what was good. But also sometimes you just you can't do the same thing sometimes. And that's just what works for me. Both of my parents died in December. And so Christmas is just really not that wonderful time of the year for me. It was raising children. I made the best of that and had it. But so I try to do different things that bring me joy, that bring my family joy. My kids, once they got too old for all the little kiddie stuff. Now what we enjoy doing, we like to play board games. We might only do it that one day on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, but it's something that we do. That's something different that I didn't do with my family, or that I didn't do, in our previous life as a family of 5.
I love that. Creating new memories by honoring, but still honoring the past as well. I love that.
Yeah. So and I think acknowledging too that grief is also related to not just death, but many families go through separations, divorces, and those cause a lot of stresses and struggles. And so I just encourage any parents that are kind of going through that right now, just try to make new traditions for your kids in your new space and your new place. My first year, I took my kids and we went to Williamsburg because we just couldn't deal with what we need. You know, we didn't want to be here. It was too many memories. And my kids will tell you that's one of their favorite Christmas memories.
Wow.
Yeah.
So our time is almost up. Is there one last little nugget that you want to share with us before we talk about where people can find the book and where people can find you as well?
Yeah. I guess if nothing else, you know, my why on writing this book was to encourage people to not be afraid to look into yourself, to deal with the things that you need to deal with, because you can heal and you can move forward, and just to encourage each other and inspire each other along the journey, because that's what it takes to get through this world that we're living in.
That is so true. So tell people where they can find you at.
Okay, so on Facebook, I'm Melissa Harrell, author. You can find me there. You can follow my page, and then you can keep up with all the events that I'm doing or new releases. You'll find out when that new fiction book comes out, right? Also my website is rccforyou.com, or it can also be found by looking up Melissa Harrell, Googling, and you'll find yourself there. That talks about trainings, speaking engagements, and other services that I offer through my business. My blogs are also located on that website.
And your book?
Yes, it's available on Amazon. And if you're here local in Goldsboro, I will be at Mickey's Pastry Shop tomorrow morning, which is the day before Thanksgiving. Should be tons of fun in there that day. From 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., I'll be selling and signing books there. And also at the Downtown Pharmacy here in Goldsboro on Saturday, December the 3rd from 10 to 12. But you can get that on Amazon as well.
And your children's book, tell us again what your children's book's name is.
Elizabeth and Stella Meet Zoe, and it is available on Amazon. It is also available at both of those book signing events that I just mentioned.
And if you're local to New Bern, you can find your book in New Bern in some of the...
Yes, at the Next Chapter bookstore in downtown New Bern.
All right. I can't wait to see it in a Books A Million or
Right.
Barnes & Noble. I'm surprised it's not in Barnes & Noble, especially the one in Greenville, because hey, you're an ECU alum.
That's right. That's right. I'll have to get to work on that.
Well, Melissa, thank you so much for coming on, for sharing, for writing your book, for sharing your life, because anybody that knows you knows that you have gone through so much in the last couple of years. It probably would have put anybody else under already, but you have gone, I hate to use the word resilient because you already said it, we throw that word around, but to me, you are the picture of resiliency, because you have taken things, even though it's been hard on you, you've taken it all in stride, and you've done it with grace. And anybody that knows you knows they can just look at you and say, wow, things that you've gone through.
And I think, Melissa, that is probably one of the reasons it was important to write the book, because as you share, I'm extremely vulnerable with my own depression, suicidal ideation. And I think it's important to remember that just because we can come to the other side doesn't mean that it won't be hard walking through that space. So giving people permission to feel the pain is important. And Melissa, I'd just like to thank you. You have been an incredible support to me since I started blogging, writing. And you've said to me from the beginning, when are you going to write that book? When are you going to write that book? When are you going to write that book? And so I'd just like to say thank you for all of your support, your genius encouragement, and all of your wild and wicked tools and skill sets.
I like the way you said.
I appreciate you.
I like the way you said wild and wicked tools to make people think, okay, what is she up to?
Oh, she's got all kind of tricks in her bag, folks. So thank you.
Well, I know this is not going to be the last time you're going to be on the podcast. We'll probably be multiple more times, because I know that if I ever need any conversation about mental health, you're my go-to person.
Absolutely.
And you absolutely jump at it and said, yes, when can we do it?
That's happy to do it.
Yep. So thank you, Melissa, for coming on. Guys, I will put in the show notes every place you can find Melissa, as well as every place you can find her books. Amazon's probably the easiest. I do have a question, though.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about recording for Audible?
Yes, except for it's super expensive.
Okay.
Very expensive.
But I do have a tip for those that would rather listen to the audio version.
Okay.
You can go and Kindle has the talk to speech or the text to speech. So you can actually buy it on Kindle instead of buying the hardback if you don't like the hand, and turn on the speech, and
you'll read it to you.
And it'll read it to you.
Oh, good to know. I will remember that. Okay.
So it has to be a Kindle. It has to be a Kindle. It cannot be like an iPhone. It has to be an actual Kindle that you do it on.
Okay, and you'll read it. Well, that's good for your viewers to know and for me to know moving forward. Yeah.
Especially if you have someone that it cannot read a book, cannot physically read because they lost their eyesight or don't know how to read, and then they'll be able to do that.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So, Melissa, thank you once again for coming on. Be blessed, and from the bottom of my heart, I adore you. I adore you, and I applaud you for the courage to write this book.
Well, thank you again.
All right, guys, we will see you on the next chat from the Blog Cabin. Bye.
Bye.